The battlefield stretched endlessly before him, a desolate expanse of charred earth and twisted metal. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning fuel and the metallic tang of blood. He could feel his own life seeping away, warm and sticky against his side where the enemy's blade had pierced through armor and flesh alike. His vision blurred as he lay prone on the ground, the cacophony of war dimming into a distant roar. Each breath came in shallow gasps, like trying to draw air through water. He knew death was close, too close, but he couldn't bring himself to give in just yet. Above him loomed an alien sky, its colors unfamiliar and shifting, painted with hues no human eye should have been able to process. It wasn't Earth. It hadn't been for months now. This world belonged to them. The others, as they were called by those who still clung to hope back home. Being so different from humanity that their very presence defied comprehension. Their technology surpassed anything humans had ever dreamed of, their weapons more devastating than any nuclear arsenal. And yet, what terrified him most wasn't their power, it was their silence. They didn't speak, not in words anyone could understand. Instead, they communicated through gestures, tones, or some inexplicable connection no one had managed to decipher. He thought about the war, not just the skirmish but the larger conflict that had dragged humanity across light years to fight battles they barely understood. How had it come to this? Decades ago, first contact had seemed promising, cautious optimism tempered by fear, curiosity mingled with suspicion. But then misunderstandings turned into accusations, negotiations collapsed under the weight of mistrust, and suddenly there were no diplomats left, only soldiers. Soldiers like him, sent to die for reasons no one fully grasped anymore. His thoughts drifted to the squad he'd lost earlier that day. Their faces flickered in his mind, each one marked by exhaustion and resolve. He remembered Private Chen's laugh during rare moments of levity, Corporal Ruiz's quiet determination, Lieutenant Harper's steady voice barking orders over the comms. Now they were gone, swallowed by the same merciless void that was slowly claiming him. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. Had he done enough? Could he have saved them? A shadow passed over him, blocking out the strange light of the alien sun. At first, he thought it was another attacker coming to finish the job, but when he forced his eyes open, squinting against the glare, he saw something unexpected. She stood above him, tall and imposing, her silhouette cutting sharply against the alien sky. Her features were angular, almost sculpted, with skin that shimmered faintly under the shifting light. Her eyes, an otherworldly shade of violet, locked onto his, unreadable yet piercing. For a moment, neither moved. Him because he lacked the strength, her. Perhaps because she was deciding whether he was worth saving. When she finally knelt beside him, her movements were deliberate, graceful even, despite the chaos surrounding them. In her hands, she held what looked like a vial filled with glowing liquid, a deep crimson that pulsed faintly, as if alive. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. Was she assessing him? Judging him? He wanted to ask, to demand answers, but all that escaped his lips was a weak groan of pain. Without hesitation, she pressed the vial to his wound, and he felt the warmth spread instantly, chasing away the cold creeping through his veins. The sensation was overwhelming, both soothing and excruciating, as if his body were being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. His vision swam again, but this time it wasn't fading. It was sharpening, focusing on her face with unnatural clarity. Something was happening to him, something beyond mere healing. He tried to pull away, instinct screaming at him to resist, but her grip was firm, unyielding. Then came the bond. It hit him like a tidal wave, crashing over his consciousness and pulling him into depths he couldn't escape. Images flashed before his eyes, scenes of battles fought long before his arrival, landscapes untouched by war, faces both alien and achingly familiar. He saw her standing amidst ruins, her expression hardened by loss. He saw flashes of her people, their forms blending into streaks of light and color. And beneath it all, he felt her emotions, anger, sorrow, determination, all intertwined in a complex web that defied logic. When the surge subsided, leaving him gasping for air, he realized two things simultaneously. First, the wound in his side was gone, replaced by smooth, unbroken skin. Second, she was inside his mind, or maybe he was inside hers. The connection was undeniable, raw and electric, binding them together in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. She rose to her feet, her violet eyes meeting his once more before she turned and disappeared into the haze of battle. As he lay there, stunned and reeling, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Her name, he later learned, was Zenara. Not that she told him directly. Names among her kind held sacred significance, revealed only to those deemed worthy. To everyone else, she was simply the commander, a title whispered with reverence, and sometimes fear, by her own soldiers. Yet to him, she became something far more complex. She was his savior, his tormentor, and now, inexplicably, his tether to a reality that had shifted beyond recognition. In the days following their encounter, he noticed changes within himself, subtle at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. His senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. Sounds became clearer, scents more distinct, colors richer and more vibrant. Even his reflexes seemed heightened, as though his body had been rewired to respond faster than before. At night, when sleep eluded him, fragments of memories, not his own, would surface unbidden, vivid and visceral. Scenes of alien worlds bathed in twin suns, rituals conducted under starlit skies, and moments of quiet intimacy shared between beings whose faces remained just out of focus. He tried to push them aside, telling himself they were dreams born of stress or delirium, but deep down, he knew better. These weren't dreams. They were glimpses into her mind. Zenara rarely spoke to him after that initial meeting, though she never strayed far. She assigned him to a unit of her soldiers, ensuring he remained under her watchful eye while keeping her distance personally. When their paths crossed, which happened often enough to feel deliberate, her gaze lingered longer than necessary, searching for something he couldn't identify. He found himself doing the same, studying her movements, her expressions, desperate to understand the enigma she presented. Her presence commanded respect, even awe, among her troops, yet there was a solitude about her that intrigued him. She carried herself with an air of authority tempered by restraint, as if every word and action were carefully measured. It made him wonder what burdens weighed on her shoulders. Their interactions were few but charged with an intensity that bordered on unbearable. Once, during a lull in combat, he approached her tentatively, driven by questions he couldn't suppress any longer. "Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She turned to face him, her violet eyes locking onto his with unnerving precision. For a moment, she said nothing, merely observing him as if weighing the worth of his inquiry. Then, without warning, she reached out and touched his temple, her fingers cool against his skin. A flood of sensations overwhelmed him, images of her people falling in battle, of barren landscapes scarred by endless warfare, of hope dwindling but never entirely extinguished. When she withdrew her hand, he staggered backward, breathless and disoriented. "You carry our survival," she said simply, her voice low and resonant, like the hum of distant machinery. The words didn't make sense, not immediately, but they lingered in his mind, haunting him long after she walked away. Despite the growing connection, or perhaps because of it, he struggled to reconcile his loyalty to humanity with the bond forming between them. Every time he looked at her, he saw not just an alien warrior but a reflection of everything he'd been taught to fear and hate. Yet, how could he despise someone who had saved his life, who continued to shield him even as she kept him at arm's length? The internal conflict gnawed at him, manifesting in restless nights and terse exchanges with his fellow soldiers. They noticed the change in him, of course. They always did. Whispers followed him wherever he went, speculations about why the commander favored him, what secrets he might be hiding. Some accused him of betrayal, others of weakness. He ignored them all, retreating further into himself until he felt like a ghost drifting through the remnants of his old life. And then there were the dreams. Vivid, relentless, and impossible to dismiss, they pulled him deeper into her world with each passing night. He saw her as a child, running through fields of bioluminescent flora, laughter echoing in the crisp air. He watched her train under the watchful eyes of elders, mastering skills that seemed almost supernatural in their complexity. He witnessed moments of triumph and devastation, love and loss, all pieces of a puzzle he couldn't fully assemble. Through these visions, he began to see her not as an enemy but as a person, shaped by experiences as harrowing and defining as his own. The realization unsettled him, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of war and the humanity, or lack thereof, that fueled it. Yet, no matter how much he learned about her, gaps remained. There were things she withheld, barriers she refused to let him cross. Sometimes, when their gazes met across the battlefield or during brief encounters in camp, he sensed the weight of those unspoken truths pressing down on her. It frustrated him, this inability to bridge the chasm between them completely. But frustration gave way to determination. If she wouldn't come to him willingly, he would find a way to reach her, to uncover the secrets she guarded so fiercely. Because somewhere along the line, he realized he didn't just want to understand her, he needed to. The battlefield was quieter than usual, the kind of eerie calm that often preceded chaos. He sat alone near the edge of the encampment, staring out at the alien horizon where jagged spires jutted into the sky like broken teeth. The bond between him and Zanara throbbed faintly in the background of his consciousness, a constant reminder of the ties that bound them together. It wasn't intrusive exactly, but it was persistent, a pulse that matched neither his heartbeat nor any rhythm he recognized. He had grown accustomed to its presence, though he doubted he would ever truly understand it. A sudden commotion drew his attention. Voices rose in alarm, sharp and urgent, cutting through the stillness. His instincts kicked in before he could think, propelling him to his feet and toward the source of the disturbance. As he approached, he saw a group of her soldiers gathered around something, or someone, on the ground. The tension in the air was palpable, and when he pushed through the crowd, his stomach sank at the sight before him. One of her warriors lay sprawled motionless, their sleek armor cracked and scorched. Blood pooled beneath them, dark and viscous, shimmering faintly in the dim light. For a moment, panic seized him. Was this an ambush? An isolated attack? But no, the scene felt wrong somehow. Too contained, too deliberate. And then he noticed the small device clutched in the fallen soldier's hand, its surface etched with intricate alien glyphs that glowed faintly red. It was a weapon, one he recognized all too well. Human design, repurposed for sabotage. Someone from his side had done this. Anger surged within him, hot and acidic, mingling with guilt and disbelief. Who could have authorized such an act? What purpose could it possibly serve? Before he could dwell on it further, Zanara appeared, moving with the fluid grace of a predator stalking its prey. Her expression was unreadable, but the storm brewing in her violet eyes spoke volumes. She knelt beside the fallen soldier, her hands hovering hesitantly over their wounds before she finally placed them gently on their chest. The glow of her touch illuminated the space around them, casting an ethereal light over the grim tableau. But it wasn't enough. The injured soldier convulsed once, violently, then went still. Zanara froze, her hands trembling as she pulled them away. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked shaken, vulnerable in a way that made his chest tighten. Around them, her soldiers murmured softly, their voices heavy with grief. No one moved to disturb her as she remained crouched there, staring at the lifeless form before her. He stepped forward instinctively, drawn by some force he couldn't explain. When he reached her side, he knelt without thinking, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. The gesture was meant to offer comfort, solidarity, but the moment his skin touched hers, the bond flared to life with shocking intensity. Images flooded his mind, memories of the fallen soldier laughing with comrades, training under Zanara's watchful eye, fighting alongside her in countless battles. He saw their loyalty, their courage, their unwavering dedication to her cause. And he saw Zanara's pain, raw and unfiltered, slicing through him like a blade. She turned to look at him, her violet eyes blazing with fury and sorrow. "Your people," she said, her voice low and dangerous, each word laden with accusation. "This is your doing." He opened his mouth to protest, to deny responsibility, but the truth hung heavy in the air. Whether or not he had been directly involved, this was the result of the war, a war fueled by hatred, mistrust, and acts of cruelty committed by both sides. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating in its enormity. He couldn't meet her gaze, guilt rooting him to the spot. Around them, her soldiers began to stir, their murmurs growing louder, angrier. Some glanced at him with undisguised hostility, their weapons shifting in his direction. He tensed, knowing full well that if Zanara gave the order, they wouldn't hesitate to act. Yet she remained silent, her focus locked solely on him. The bond between them pulsed erratically, reflecting the turmoil raging within her, and, he realized with a start, within himself. Finally, she rose to her feet, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Leave us," she commanded, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. Her soldiers hesitated briefly before dispersing, leaving the two of them alone with the body of their fallen comrade. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the soft hum of the alien wind. Then, without warning, Zanara grabbed his wrist, pulling him close until their faces were inches apart. Her grip was firm, unyielding, but there was something else in her touch. Desperation, perhaps, or a plea he couldn't quite decipher. "Do you see now?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is what your kind has wrought. Death. Betrayal. Endless suffering." "I didn't," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "It does not matter who struck the blow," she said, her tone hardening. "What matters is that it was allowed to happen. That it continues to happen. Tell me, human, what will it take for your people to stop? How many must die before you are satisfied?" Her words struck him like physical blows, each one landing with brutal precision. He wanted to defend himself, to argue that not all humans were responsible, that there were good people fighting for peace, but the arguments died on his lips. Because in that moment, he wasn't sure he believed them anymore. The war had consumed everything, twisting ideals into justifications and turning allies into enemies. Where did the blame truly lie? With individuals? Governments? Or was it something deeper, something inherent to the nature of conflict itself? He looked down at the fallen soldier, their lifeless form a stark reminder of the cost of hatred. And then he looked at Zanara, her face etched with pain and resolve. For the first time, he saw not just the commander, not just the alien, but a leader burdened by loss, a being driven by the same desire for justice and survival that motivated him. The realization shook him to his core. "I don't know," he admitted quietly, his voice breaking under the weight of his own uncertainty. "I don't know how to fix this." Her grip loosened slightly, though she didn't release him entirely. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something soften in her expression, a flicker of understanding, or maybe resignation. But then it was gone, replaced by the steely determination he'd come to associate with her. "Then we will find a way," she said firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. "Together." The weight of her declaration settled over him, heavy and undeniable. Together. The word echoed in his mind, fraught with implications he couldn't yet grasp. As she finally released him and turned back to tend to her fallen soldier, he felt the bond between them shift, strengthening in ways he couldn't explain. Whatever path lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. It would be forged not just by duty or necessity, but by something far more profound, a fragile, tenuous hope that refused to be extinguished. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unease. Zanara's words lingered in his mind, their weight pressing down on him like an invisible shackle. Together. The promise, or threat, of those words haunted him, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. He found himself questioning everything. The war, his role in it, even the very nature of the bond that tied him to her. It was no longer just a connection forged by blood. It had become something deeper, more insidious, a shared burden neither of them could escape. Yet, as much as he tried to focus on finding answers, the world around them seemed determined to pull them apart. Rumors spread quickly through both sides of the conflict, fueled by paranoia and fear. Among his own people, whispers began to circulate about him, that he had gone rogue, that he was colluding with the enemy. Some accused him outright, others avoided him altogether, casting wary glances whenever he passed. Even those who had once been allies now regarded him with suspicion, their trust eroded by the undeniable fact that he carried a piece of the enemy inside him. On her side, things weren't much better. Her soldiers watched him closely, their loyalty to Zanara unwavering but their tolerance for him wearing thin. They didn't trust him, not fully, and he couldn't blame them. Every time he entered their camp, every time he stood beside her, he felt their eyes boring into him, searching for signs of betrayal. And though Zanara never openly acknowledged their scrutiny, he knew she felt it too. She shielded him when she could, deflecting questions and silencing dissent with a single glance, but the cracks were beginning to show. Her authority, absolute as it had once seemed, was being tested. Then came the ambush. It happened during what should have been a routine patrol, a simple mission to scout the perimeter of their territory. Zanara led the group herself, insisting he join despite his protests. "You need to learn," she said simply, her tone brooking no argument. So he went, armed and wary, acutely aware of how out of place he felt among her warriors. The forest they traversed was dense and alien, its towering trees casting strange shadows that danced across the ground. The air was thick with humidity and the faint hum of unseen creatures, creating an atmosphere that set his nerves on edge. They were deep within the woods when it struck. One moment, they were moving silently through the underbrush. The next, chaos erupted. Explosions tore through the silence, sending shards of bark and earth flying in all directions. Shouts filled the air, commands barked in alien tongues, cries of pain and anger blending into a cacophony of violence. Her soldiers scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks as enemy fire rained down upon them. But these weren't human forces attacking, they were another faction of aliens, ones he'd only heard rumors about. Mercenaries, some called them. Others whispered darker names, hinting at experiments gone wrong and weapons designed to annihilate entire species. Zanara moved with terrifying efficiency, directing her troops while simultaneously fending off attackers. He stayed close to her, unsure of what else to do, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he fought alongside beings who might have killed him without hesitation mere weeks ago. The battle raged on, brutal and unrelenting, until a sharp cry cut through the din. One of her soldiers fell, clutching at a wound that bubbled with unnatural green ichor. Poison. His stomach churned as realization dawned. The mercenaries weren't just trying to kill them. They were using biological weapons, designed to cripple and corrupt from within. "Retreat!" Zanara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Her soldiers obeyed instantly, falling back in organized retreats while covering each other's movements. But as they moved, he noticed something odd. The mercenaries weren't pursuing, not aggressively, anyway. Their attacks slowed, becoming sporadic and imprecise, almost as if they were waiting for something. And then he saw it. A figure emerged from the smoke and debris, tall and imposing, clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Its face was obscured by a mask, featureless save for two glowing red slits where eyes should have been. It raised a hand, and the remaining mercenaries ceased firing immediately, retreating into the shadows as swiftly as they had come. "You've grown soft, Zanara," the figure said, its voice distorted and mechanical, yet unmistakably mocking. "Letting humans fight your battles now? How far you've fallen." Zanara stepped forward, placing herself between the figure and her soldiers. "Kale," she said, her tone icy. "I should have known." Kale tilted its head, the gesture eerily reminiscent of a predator sizing up its prey. "Did you think we wouldn't find out? About your little experiment?" It gestured toward him, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "You've broken every law, crossed every boundary. Do you really think the council will let this stand?" Her expression hardened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a vulnerability she couldn't quite hide. "This isn't your concern," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "Leave now, or I will make you regret it." Kale laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers through everyone present. "Oh, I'm not here to fight you, sister. Not yet, anyway." The word hit like a punch to the gut. "Sister?" He stared at Zanara, shock rooting him to the spot. She didn't meet his gaze, her focus fixed solely on Kale. "No, I'm here to deliver a message. The council knows what you've done. They know about the bond. And they won't tolerate such contamination." Before anyone could react, Kale turned and disappeared into the forest, its form dissolving into shadow as if it had never been there. Silence fell over the clearing, heavy and suffocating. Her soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier discipline giving way to murmurs of unease. But Zanara remained motionless, her body rigid with barely contained rage. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. We move out. Now. Without waiting for acknowledgement, she turned and began walking, her pace brisk and purposeful. Her soldiers followed without question, leaving him to trail behind, his mind reeling. Sister. The bond. Contamination. The implications swirled in his head, forming a tangled web of questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Whatever secrets Zanara had been keeping, they were far bigger and far more dangerous than he'd imagined. And now, caught in the crossfire of politics and power struggles he barely understood, he realized one thing with chilling clarity. The war wasn't just between humans and aliens. It was tearing apart her people too. The journey back to camp was fraught with an unspoken tension that hung thick in the air, heavier than the humid alien atmosphere around them. Each step felt like a march toward an uncertain fate, and though Zanara's soldiers moved with practiced discipline, their usual confidence seemed shaken. The revelation of Kale's presence, and the implications of his words, had cracked something fundamental within their ranks. Whispers spread among her warriors, hushed conversations that ceased whenever he drew near. He couldn't blame them, even he didn't fully trust himself anymore. Zanara walked at the head of the group, her posture rigid and unyielding, but there was a brittleness to her movements now, as if she were holding herself together by sheer force of will. Her violet eyes scanned the horizon constantly, watchful for threats both visible and unseen. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the ambush site, and every attempt he made to approach her was met with silence or a curt dismissal. It was clear she was retreating into herself, building walls not just against him but against everyone. When they finally reached the encampment, the scene was eerily quiet. Fires burned low, casting flickering shadows across makeshift shelters, but the usual bustle of activity was absent. Instead, clusters of soldiers stood in small groups, speaking in low tones, their faces etched with worry. As Zanara strode past them, heads turned to follow her progress, gazes lingering longer than necessary before dropping away. She ignored them all, heading straight for her command tent without so much as a glance in his direction. He hesitated outside the entrance, torn between giving her space and confronting the truth head-on. The bond between them pulsed insistently, urging him forward, but it was laced with unease, a reflection of her own turmoil. Finally, steeling himself, he pushed aside the flap and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single lantern hanging from the ceiling. Maps and schematics covered the walls, scrawled with markings in alien script that he couldn't decipher. Zanara stood at the center of the room, her back to him, hands braced on the edge of a table laden with tactical displays. Her shoulders rose and fell with each measured breath, but otherwise, she gave no indication that she knew he was there. "You're my sister," he said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Kale called you that." She stiffened but didn't turn around. For a long moment, she said nothing, and he wondered if she would deny it altogether. Then, softly, almost reluctantly, she spoke. "Yes. By blood, if not by choice." Her admission hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs. "Sister." The word echoed in his mind, carrying with it a cascade of questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "Because it changes nothing," she snapped, spinning to face him. Her violet eyes blazed with anger and something else. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "What difference does it make? Would knowing have changed how you see me? Would it have made this, whatever we are, any easier to understand?" He opened his mouth to respond but found no words. She was right, in a way. Knowing she was Kale's sister didn't alter the reality of their bond, or the war that threatened to tear them apart. But it did change things. It added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation, one more thread in the tangled web of secrets and lies that surrounded them both. Before either of them could say more, a commotion erupted outside the tent. Shouts rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn. Zanara's expression hardened instantly, all traces of vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of authority. "Stay here," she commanded, brushing past him toward the entrance. But he didn't obey. Ignoring her order, he followed her out into the chaos unfolding beyond the tent. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. A detachment of alien soldiers had arrived, their armor gleaming with insignias he didn't recognize. They carried themselves with an air of superiority, their weapons trained on Zanara's troops, who had formed a defensive line around their commander. At the forefront stood Kale, his featureless mask glinting in the firelight. "Council envoys," Kale announced, his distorted voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "Here to address the matter of your transgressions, Commander." Zanara stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "This is my territory. You have no authority here." "Your defiance ends tonight," Kale replied, raising a hand. Behind him, the council soldiers raised their weapons, energy charges crackling ominously. "Surrender the human, and we may yet show leniency." No, the word left her lips before he could process what was happening. She stepped further into the open, placing herself squarely between him and the advancing forces. "You'll have to kill me first." A murmur rippled through the crowd, shock and disbelief mingling with admiration. Even her soldiers seemed taken aback by her declaration, their loyalty warring with fear of the council's wrath. He stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was madness. Suicide. Yet, looking into her violet eyes, he saw no hesitation, no trace of doubt. Only resolve. And then, suddenly, he understood. This wasn't just about protecting him, or even about defying the council. It was about proving something greater, that bonds forged in blood and shared suffering transcended divisions of species, politics, and power. That survival meant more than clinging to old ways. It meant embracing the unknown, however terrifying it might be. Without thinking, he moved to stand beside her, ignoring the shouts of protest from both sides. "If you want him," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "you'll have to go through me too." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Kale tilted his head, studying them both with an unreadable expression. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand. "So be it," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But know this, the council will not forget, nor will they forgive." With that, he signaled for his troops to withdraw, turning his back on the standoff as if dismissing its significance. As the council soldiers disappeared into the night, the tension in the air began to dissipate, leaving behind an uneasy calm. Zanara turned to look at him, her expression inscrutable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of what had just transpired settling heavily between them. Then, softly, she said, "You shouldn't have done that." "Maybe not," he admitted, meeting her gaze. "But I couldn't let you face them alone." Her lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then perhaps there's hope for us yet." As the fires burned lower and the stars wheeled overhead, casting their alien constellations across the sky, he realized that their fight was far from over. The council, Kale, the war itself, all of it still loomed large, threatening to consume them. But for the first time, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel before, a fragile, defiant spark of possibility. Together, they might not win. But together, they would endure. And sometimes, that was enough.